Masterclass edition with Peter. Don't forget that you can find us on TikTok and YouTube. Just search the word STEM with Peter. Our videos are there, our shorts are there, where you can always learn mathematics and physics in simple language and simple terms. So today we're actually going to be looking at statistics masterclass, which has to do with your central tendency, your dispersion, and data presentation. In standard examinations, they don't give you simple ungroup data in theories. They instead give you group data that have complex tables so that you can always have more time and you have to deal with complex questions. So today we are going to be looking at our mean median mode. We are going to be looking at our mean median mode, which is our central tendency. So we are going to be looking at that. And this is a group data. This is a group data. So the question wants us to find the mark scored by 40 students in a test. So we know that the total frequency of the students are 40. So, but the question did not specify the exact mark. So we're only given the class interval. And the class interval, mind you, the class interval are usually provided with the question. Your class intervals and your frequency are mostly given to you in the question. So you don't necessarily have to bother yourself and look for your class interval. Now, how do we solve it? We need to have a master data table. Now let's get started on our master data table. Now, the first thing you need to know on your master data table is that you have your class interval. Is that we have our class interval. Now, your class interval ranges from 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30. Now, let's get this done. 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, and 41, and 41 to 50, and 41 to 50. Now, this is for our class interval. But you see, for every class interval, there must always be a class boundary. For every class interval, there must be a class boundary. And how do we get our class boundary? Very easy. Now, when you look at our class interval, looking at this class interval, we have our lower limit and we have our upper limit. Now, the lower limit is the one on the left side, which is usually the smaller number. It is usually the smaller number. It's obviously smaller than the next one. So your lower limit is usually on the left side, which is usually the smaller one. So our lower limit here is 1 and our upper limit here is 10. So how do we get our class boundary of 1 to 10, the class interval of 1 to 10? So what we need to simply do is we take away 0.5 from our lower limit and we take away and we add 0.5 to our upper limit. So this is what I mean. This is what I mean. So for our class interval, to get your class boundary, which is obviously the next one, to get your class boundaries, so we are taking away 0.5 from 1. So this is lower limit minus 0.5 and your upper limit plus 0.5. So that's how we get our class boundary. So this gives us 0.5 up until 10.5, because when you take away 0.5 from your lower limit 1, it gives you a remainder of 0.5, and when you add 0.5 to 10, this gives you 10.5. So we do the same here as well. So this gives us 10.5 up until 20.5. This gives us 20.5 up until 30.5. The next one becomes 30.5 up until 40.5. And the next one becomes 40.5 up until 50.5. So now we have our class boundary. Now we have our class boundary. Now, if you have a class interval and you have a class boundary, you must definitely have a midpoint. And a midpoint is usually grouped as x. The midpoint is usually grouped as x. Don't forget that the class interval is the same thing as our max. Now, the frequency is the same thing as our f. All these terms have their own meaning, and you are going to realize in the video when the time comes the meaning of all these words. Now, we have our midpoint. We have our midpoint. And our midpoint is usually x. Our midpoint is usually x. Now, how do we find our midpoint? Now, it's the same logic. How do we find our midpoint? Our midpoint is the same logic. What you need to do is to add your lower limit and your upper limit together, and you divide them by the sum of 2. You add your lower limit and your upper limit together, and you divide them by 2. I'm going to write this. I'm going to rewrite this so that it can make the explanation easier. So your lower limit plus your upper limit divided by 2, and this is how we get the midpoint. This is how we have our midpoint, which is usually x. So 1 plus 10 actually gives me 11, and if I divide 11 by 2, it gives me 5.5. It gives me 5.5. Now, if I do this one as well, this gives me 15.5. The next one gives us 25.5, 35.5, and 45.5. Now, we have our class interval, we have our class boundaries, and we have our midpoint. Now, the next one on the list actually happens to be the frequency. And the frequency has already been given to us in the question above. So we don't actually need to go further to look for the frequency. But frequency happens to be the number of times that a particular data occurs. That is what frequency means. Frequency means the number of times that a particular data occurs. So frequency, which is usually denoted by f. Frequency, which is usually denoted by f. So our frequency have been given to us. So we have 4, we have 6, we have 12, we have 10, and we have 8. Now you see, for you to get your master data table, you need to submit your frequency together. And what summation means is that you need to add the total frequency that you have together. You need to submit everything together. So any particular value or any particular column that contains a frequency value has to be submitted together. And the symbol for summation is usually written as E, like this. This is the symbol of summation. So if you are summating f, it means that we are adding all the columns together. So if you add all this together, this gives us 40. So the summation of f, which means the addition of all the frequencies together, is giving me a 40. Now, let's move to the next one. Now, we're moving to the next one. The next one actually happens to be the multiplication of your frequency and your midpoint together, which is known as your fx. Is known as your fx. So what this simply means is that the product of your midpoint, which is the average of your class interval, so it means the average of your class interval multiplied by the original number of the values that we have. So your midpoint multiplied by your frequency. So when we do this, this gives me 5.5 multiplied by 4, and this gives us 22. We have 22, we have 93, we have 306, we have 355, and we have 364. So when you look at this, I have obtained all these values by multiplying my midpoint by my frequency. By multiplying my midpoint here by my frequency. So when you multiply 5 multiplied by 4, 5.5 multiplied by 4, you are going to get 22. When you do the same for everything here, you are going to get the exact values that we have here. So what do we need to do? Like I said the other time, I said for every value that has the frequency embedded in them, what you have to do is that you have to submit it. That means you have to add the values together. So for this one as well, so our summation of fx, it means that when we add everything together on this particular column, when we add everything together, we must have 1140. 1140. When we add that together, it must give us 1140. Now we are not done with the table. Now we on the master data table, we usually multiply our frequency also by the square value of our midpoint. So we are going to look for the square value of this one and we are going to multiply it by our frequency. So this gives us fx squared. This gives us fx squared. And how do we calculate that? It means that you are multiplying your frequency. You are multiplying your frequency by the square of your midpoint. Multiplication of a frequency by the square of your midpoint. So it means that before you have to do this, you have to find the square of the values of your midpoint before multiplying them by the original frequency. So if I'm doing that, this means that I'm going to square 5.5, that is 5.5 multiplied by 5.5, or by saying 5.5 raised to the power of 2. So 5.5 raised to the power of 2 will be multiplied by 4. And when you do that, this gives us 121. So 15.5 to the power of 2 multiplied by 6. That gives us 1441.5. For the next one, this gives us 7,803. For the next one, 12602.5. For the next one, we have 16562. Now, when you actually take a look at this as well, this also has the frequency embedded in it. So, and I said that at every point in time where your frequency is actually attached or embedded with a particular value, what you need to do is to submit it. That means you are adding everything in that particular column. So by adding everything in this particular column, we are going to have our summation of fx squared. We are going to have our summation of fx squared. And our summation of fx squared is going to give us 38,530. 38,530. Now, for the last one on the table is what we know as our cumulative frequency. Our cumulative frequency. And our cumulative frequency is the same as your CF. Cumulative frequency. Cumulative frequency is known as CF. Now, what does cumulative frequency means? Cumulative frequency simply means that you are piling up your frequency together without taking away the previous one. So what it means is that you are stockpiling on your frequency. So you are not removing anything from your frequency. So accumulation is the addition of stored up values. You keep storing the values that are there before without taking away anything from that particular container or containment. Now, so we are going to do this. Our cumulative frequency just means that we keep adding layers on top our frequency. So this frequency remains the same here as 4 because that means there was actually no value of any frequency before. So our frequency remains as 0. The original frequency remains as 0. So by adding 0 to this 4, we are going to have 4. So now imagine it that you already have four sets of books and you accumulated an extra 6. That means you've not taken away the 4. By accumulating an extra 6 to the 4, it means that you now have it means that you now have a new value of 10. So this gives us 10. And how did we get this 10? This gives us 4 plus 6. So the frequency plus this, your cumulative frequency plus your new frequency. That's how we have gotten it. So if you are to do the next one, this gives us 10, because 10 is now your new frequency. So the new 10 is now your new cumulative frequency. So this 10 has to be accumulated with the 12. So this gives us 22. And how did you get that? 10 plus 12. The 22, the accumulation of 10 to the 22 gives us 32. That is 22 plus 10. And when you say 32 plus 8, that is the accumulation of 8 to this 32. This gives us 40. That is 32 plus 8. 32 plus 8. Now, we have our master data table already. So this is the table. This is actually the table for the particular question that was given to us below. So now we need to actually use this table to calculate the mean, the median, and the mode. We can actually use to calculate the mean, the median, the mode, the range, the variance. We are actually going to check it. But today we are actually going to only be solving on the mean, median, and the mode just for today. So stay tuned.